Hello and good day. I'm very excited to welcome you to our second expert webinar of our new manager series, Executing with Agility, with our special guest, Ori Brafman. My name is Adam Bruniger, and I lead our client solutions team here at ExecOnline. I'm joined by Chip Cleary, our Chief Academic Officer in charge of developing our programs at ExecOnline, and Ori Brafman, who is playing a lead role in our new manager program and the star of the show today. Chip will more fully introduce Ori and his background in just a few minutes. Now, before we begin, I'd like to spend just a moment on ExecOnline for those on the line who are new to our company. ExecOnline enables organizations to rapidly deliver leadership development that creates lasting organizational impact. We do that in a few ways. We partner with elite business schools like Columbia, Wharton, MIT, Yale, and Berkeley to create university-certified programs delivered through our cloud-based platform. We have an enterprise-focused delivery model. We focus on your business challenges to deploy solutions that help you resolve those challenges and create organizational impact. And we provide measurable business impact by evaluating participants' business projects to provide you with ROI metrics to make the best business case for continued development investments. Now let's discuss the agenda for today. We have 4 items on the agenda today. First, organizational challenges with developing new managers. By way of context, as many of you know, ExecOnline is building a new manager program that is launching in February of 2019. We are developing that program using a charter group process where we have invited clients to help us truly co-create the product so it is aligned with business objectives. In this section, I'm going to quickly share with you some of the lessons we have learned about developing new managers based on our research and from interacting with our charter group members. Second, Ori and Chip are going to discuss agility and Ori's perspective on how managers must learn to behave differently in a rapidly changing world. Third, Chip is going to spend a few moments discussing the structure and objectives of the new manager program I just described. And finally, we will have a question and answer session. Now let's get started with the first agenda item. So I'd like to start by describing the current state of new managers. And it's not great. There are a couple of things we know. First, on the left-hand side of the page, our new managers are not performing at the level we expect. Some 60% underperformed or failed within 2 years, according to data from CEB. Second, our new managers need to raise their game. They're being asked to manage in an environment where there's more enterprise change than ever before. In the center of the page, 5 major enterprise changes in the last 5 years. And in organizations that are substantially flatter, which means managers have to manage employees with more autonomy and often less ability to provide promotions. Given these rising expectations, our clients have told us they expect the underperformance to continue. So why are new managers underperforming? When we asked our charter group this question, they indicated new managers fail for 3 reasons. First, they don't activate. They don't shift mentally from an individual contributor to a manager. They're not understanding how to provide value in a different way. As part of that, they're not accurately assessing the business context or setting clear goals. But even if new managers activate, they often don't adapt. As things change in the business, they're not regularly reassessing shifts and moving their teams toward the new goal. We hear this is a big pain point for CEOs, especially as they shift the business. Third, they don't develop critical connections. As organizations get flatter, managers need to develop the critical connections to help themselves and their teams lead. So how are most organizations trying to solve this problem? Well, there are 3 current approaches most organizations are taking. First is the fire hose approach, where organizations hold a half-day to 2-day or more day meeting or workshop to raise awareness of key management responsibilities. This often does a good job of spreading awareness, but our charter members say that it doesn't lead to application. The second is a resource library approach, where organizations provide video content for managers. The virtue of this approach is that the library can be leveraged when you have a management challenge. But these are underutilized, and the content is often academic. And some organizations take a blended approach. In general, very few organizations are satisfied with these approaches. Only 9% say they are good or better. And most organizations say they want something that is more virtual and agile. So with that as context, let me turn to Chip to introduce Ori Brafman to discuss how to make the mindset shift we talked about earlier.
Fabulous. Hi, everybody. This is Chip Cleary. As Adam mentioned, I'm our Chief Academic Officer with ExecOnline. And we've been having just a fabulous time over the past couple months collaborating with Ori as he's contributed to the development of the new manager program, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on. Let me just give you a little bit of background about Ori as we go into our conversation. Ori, we've heard from our charter group members, from our very first interactions with them, how the pace of change is really impacting what it means to be a frontline manager and to be a new manager in an organization. So this notion of adapting that Adam mentioned, agility, has really been one of the central objectives that we've been driving for as we've been developing the new manager program. And so we've been collaborating with Ori on that. To give you a little bit of background on Ori, as you can see, he's a senior advisor. He's a speaker who's worked with numerous organizations, ranging from tech organizations, sometimes smaller tech organizations, very large tech organizations, done a fair amount of work with the military. So if you try to think about bringing agility to an organization that you might think of as being lacking in flexibility, really, working in challenging environments. Ori's an entrepreneur, having founded or co-founded a number of institutions, including the ones on the slide, and he's been a best-selling author for over a decade. Leading out with The Starfish and the Spider. We'll hear a little bit more about that in a few minutes. In a series of books through that. I'd just like to say that we've been really excited working with Ori, both because of the specific lens that he brings that really makes agility, adaptability, pragmatic, and approachable for leaders across levels in the organization. And also just fun stories. So we hope to hear a little bit about that as we move forward. So with that ado, Ori, thanks for joining us today. Really looking forward to our conversation. Why don't we go ahead and get started? And I think the first chunk we're going to talk about is the subtitle of your book, Unstoppable Power of Leaderless or Leaderful Organizations. Why don't you jump in and paint a picture for us of what does it look like for a group to be rigid, and conversely, what can it look like for a group to be agile?
Well, the subtitle of the book is Unstoppable Power of Leaderless Organizations, but I think a more apt description is thinking about how do you create an environment of leaderful organizations? And specifically, how do you empower everyone from your organization to have a very concrete role in problem solving? And how do you, in aggregate, translate that into organizational agility? And for that, we actually take a look at history. And our story starts with Hernan Cortez, who in 1519 shows up with an army of men and a few horses to present-day Mexico City, the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. And when Cortez shows up, he really marvels by the complexity of the civilizations. There's pyramids, there's roads. It actually reminds him of his hometown of Seville. But he's not there to sightsee, right? He's there for one reason, to get gold. And Cortez asks the Aztecs to take him to their leader, and they put him in front of Montezuma II. And he gives Montezuma an ultimatum. He says, give me all your gold, or I'm going to kill you. Now think, what would you do in that situation? Well, Cortez gives up the gold. Unfortunately, the Spanish were not men of their word. They kill Montezuma, and even more horribly, they blockade the Aztec capital. Within 2 weeks, 200,000 people die. And within 2 years, the entire Aztec empire was conquered. This was just brutal. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the Aztecs fell. There was infighting amongst the tribes. There was the introduction of the horse as a new weapon. There was the biological weapons that the Spanish brought with them in the form of diseases. But you can't ignore the fact that a few men and a few horses completely destroyed a civilization. And the Spanish do the exact same thing with the Incas just a few years later. They asked for all of their gold, they took them to the leader, they killed the leader, and within 2 years took down the Incas. By the end of the century, the Spanish have effective control over the entire South continent. And it's with the winds of victory in their backs that they showed up in what is now the American Southwest, where I grew up, and encountered a different tribe, the Apache. Unlike the Aztecs, the Apache didn't have any roads, didn't have any pyramids. They also didn't have any gold. So the Spanish said, well, uh, convert to our lifestyle. And here's another very interesting difference between the Apache and the Aztecs. Unlike the Aztecs, the Apache didn't have top-down command and control leadership. Their chiefs were called Nantans. The most famous one is Geronimo. The phrase "you should" does not exist in the Apache language. So if you want to follow Nantan, you can, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. And here's where it gets really interesting. The moment that the Spanish start killing Nantans, new Nantans just take over their positions. And even more importantly, the more the Spanish fought against them, the more distributed and decentralized the Apache became. The harder that the Spanish fought, the stronger the Apache became. This was the Apache territory when the Spanish first encountered them. And after fighting off first the Spanish, then the Mexicans, then us, the Mexicans, and then us, the Americans, this was the territory. It more than doubled. In order to understand what happened with the Spanish and the Apache, we actually turn to biology and look at the metaphor of the spider and the starfish. Now, let's say you take a spider and you cut off the leg of a spider. What happens? Well, you're going to have a spider kind of hobbling around, right? What happens if you cut off the head of a spider? Well, obviously it dies. Now, what happens when you cut off the arm of a starfish? Interestingly, the starfish will grow an entirely new arm. That's because, unlike the spider, the starfish does not have a central brain. This is a picture of a Lynchia starfish where one arm is growing an entirely new starfish. And we think about this as a metaphor for business and society. These starfish organizations, everything from Alcoholics Anonymous to Wikipedia, operate by a different set of rules. And the harder that we fight them, the stronger they become. And what I've been working on for the last decade is how can very traditional organizations learn from the starfish and adapt a more agile approach to be competitive in the marketplace.
Oh, and Ori, and thanks for those stories. And again, I know from working with you, the notion of bringing in the history, then mapping it to biology. In a few minutes, we'll talk about making this real in organizations. Just has been compelling, and even the phrase from leaderless to leaderful organizations, maps against what our clients have told us as we've worked on this program in terms of the pace of change that has been a topic of conversation, for years, and the need to have people make decisions lower down in the organization. Here, just to follow up on the content you shared so far, we're talking about new managers here. So, really the first rung of leadership. And, the examples you've shown, they've been about, Montezuma, about Geronimo, the role of Nantan. To what extent do you find that the lessons you're sharing here really apply to people who are just starting their journey into leadership?
So what applies on the global stage also applies within an organization. And you think about a new manager, it's a scary place to be in sometimes, right? So much you think you have so much responsibility, and how do you accomplish all of the litany of new responsibilities that are now on your shoulders? And here really is where agility can actually live. So traditionally, we think about agility as, hey, as Adam said, hey, let's give you a fire hose approach. But when was the last time you heard of a person who is very rigid and they go through a 2-hour training and they come out flexible? It doesn't really happen, right? What actually happens is that we can create agile networks and we can empower different parts of the organization in order to tackle problems in a more effective way. And what new managers can do is create these very adaptive starfish within the larger spider organization.
So yeah, so it's about not just who I am as a person, but about the network I create and how I can do that in my existing context. Again, from your past, you've worked quite extensively in the military. Oftentimes that means individuals working in small groups within a larger context where they don't control the larger context. Let's push forward, and to the point about making our teams more like starfish. Moving from the world of history and moving from the world of biology. Can you give an example of how these ideas would play out inside a corporation, inside somebody trying to get business done?
One of my favorite examples is from the world of healthcare, and trash cans are actually helping saving lives in hospitals. Now, this is a picture of antibiotic-resistant staph infection. More people die of staph infection than of HIV/AIDS in the United States every year. And we know how to prevent staph infection. We've known this since the 19th century. You wash your hands. So hospitals have started grappling with this, and they've started taking initiatives. And one of them is they put up signs above sinks and they remind doctors to wash their hands. Unfortunately, that didn't work. So they put up bigger signs reminding people to wash their hands. Those didn't work. So they put up colorful signs, and those didn't work. Eventually, they actually sent doctors. They sent doctors to half-day programs reminding them to wash their hands. None of that worked. That's because information does not change behavior. It's probably worth repeating. Information does not change behavior. If it did, all of us would floss, none of us would smoke. So instead of just pushing information at people, at the Albert Einstein Medical Center, we assembled everyone from the head of infection control to the janitor. And in one of the meetings, this guy named Jasper, who had one of the lowest jobs in the hospital, his job was to move patients and to empty garbage cans. He made an observation. He said, in the wings of this hospital where there's a lot of infection, the garbage cans are almost always empty. He said, well, that's kind of interesting. But there's a rule about saying nothing about me without me. So rather than talking about them and those people and why are those people using gloves, we went over to that wing and we approached them and said, why are you using gloves? Don't you know these are important in saving lives? And they said, well, the nurses in this wing have extra small hands. And this hospital is so cheap that they won't give us enough extra small gloves. So, well, what if you give you more extra small gloves? And said, well, of course we'd use them. So the janitor busts out his pen, puts down his number, and every time they ran out of extra small gloves, they called him up and he'd run up and fill up the container. It's small incremental changes like these that cut down the amount of infections at the Albert Einstein Medical Center by 70%, 70% in 1 year. Now, it's not to say that every wing needed extra small gloves, nor is it to say that the janitor should be made the head of infection control. Rather, the question is, how can you find these different nodes of the network and how can you activate them and empower them depending on the context of the situation?
I mean, let me jump in on that story, Ori, because as we think about applying this to new managers, here in this story, there's it really crystallizes a point that you've made to us as we've worked together. That oftentimes the answer is already in the organization, or at least in your broader set of stakeholders, if not the organization. So it's about activating nodes in the network. And as we think about new managers, the secret here is that Jasper got the opportunity to make the observation about trash cans empty one place, not empty in another place, and that seems to be correlated with the change. As you think about like a new manager trying to figure out how do I apply these ideas and build a network, can you share a little advice about how new managers can be agile by activating the right people? Like how do you find the right Jasper for the issue you're facing today?
That's a good question, because the right Jasper is going to be different on a different day and depending on the context of the situation. So the way that I like to think about this is really in a similar way that our brain works. So I don't know if you've ever sat in a restaurant, Chip, where there's a lot of commotion and all of a sudden you hear someone say your name, and all of a sudden your ears perk up. Why is it that you heard your name over the other conversations? That's because the way that our brains work is we have something called surprise neurons. So they pay attention to all the information around us, but they only let in the information that is surprising or that is new. And you think about a new manager and the amount of data that comes into them. How do you help filter that data, and how do you help really find out what is important and what is surprising? Because the janitor was so close to the edge of the network, he had information that was important, and the question becomes, how do you empower and enable that janitor to be able to share that information? How do you effectively listen? And what's nice about here is that the information is going to be in the room.
Yeah, great. And so so we'll go on in a second and give a little bit more background about how to break that down. Again, working with you, the notion of really practical tools that we can provide new leaders for how to carry things out. Everything from how do you actually find the right Jasper for the problem you face today, all the way through, once you have a group in the room, how do you make sure that Jasper feels enabled to speak up and not feels drowned out by somebody who's wearing a bigger title that might be in the room? So, as we think about that, why don't in fact we move into this next section, which, it just give a taste of, some of the concrete guidance that you've been offering us for how can a leader not only find Jasper to solve one problem, but like you mentioned, different wings had different problems. While that may have reduced the, in the one wing, by 70%, that didn't mean that there was something else that needed to be done a month later to reduce another 50%. Can you guide us through a little bit, the way new leaders can think about how do I mobilize this sort of agility, not just as a one-time shot in the arm, but kind of as a way of being?
That's really the key point here, is that this is an ongoing process, and it's something we call the agility loop. I work with very large organizations, including the US military. And what's important is to remember, how do you create agility within structured environments, within even top-down organizations, especially when so much is on the line. The first step in this process is to listen. And we listen to make it clear to those who follow us that we value their insights, that we value their judgments and their advice. So it really sends out a signal that their voices matter and that their voices are important. And we need to think about listening, not just as an individual trait, Chip, you're a very good listener, but rather, how do you create a system for listening? And that brings us to the second part of the loop, which is amplify. So we amplify the best ideas and the best recommendations and the best practices, to establish expectations in a manner that encourages teamwork at every level of the organization. And we amplify to send a signal that what we do matters, and that it matters for the success of the entire organization. We have to remember that no one ever gets fired for not innovating. So we have to reward innovative behavior, even small incremental behavior, especially incremental behavior, because it sends such a strong signal to the rest of the organization. And our job then is to spread that innovation to the rest of the organization. The third part of the loop is inclusion. We include as we face problems because leaders operate within the understanding that the more knowledge we harvest from all ends of the organization, the more inclusion we generate. Inclusion isn't just a nice to have, it's a strategic imperative. And we include because we don't know where in this complex world where the right answer might exist. And we include to create a sense of belonging across the organization. The fourth step is probably the most important one, which is to observe and adapt. Good management will always benefit from repetition, re-emphasis, and reinforcement. Agile teams focus on making small, incremental changes in order to constantly adapt and improve. And as a new manager, your role is really to identify the priorities set by leadership and to help translate those priorities to the rest of the team. The good news is that through this process, you have more people working with you to become successful.
That's really cool. And just to bounce that against, what we've heard from some of our clients of what it can feel like to be a new manager. You mentioned earlier, Ori, it can be an emotionally difficult time. It can be a time when, participants or new managers are really feeling kind of at risk. And, if you think about the caricature that one might have in, your mind as you become a new manager for how you're going to achieve your goals, it's, well, now I'm the boss, now I got a little bit of a bump in pay, and now it's my job to make sure that, that problems get solved and improvements get made. And gee, that's different from where I was yesterday, and that feels really scary. So just as you've been sort of working with this set of ideas, which are about lots of good things happening already. It's not just necessarily about tackling problems that have never been solved anywhere before. It's about mobilizing a network as opposed to necessarily looking inside your gut or your brain for the answer. And then working with groups to move that forward and reshaping that network based on the problem of the day. Let me ask, Ori, what's the reaction you get, in terms of working with relatively junior managers? What's the reaction as from, boy, it started out like that seems like that could be scary and I'm not sure how I know how to go. How do these ideas land with new managers?
The biggest response that I get is relief, because people realize that they're not alone. So it's tempting when you put into this new situation to want to control as much as possible. And it's interesting that you can actually gain power by ceding control. And this process enables new managers to realize that there are people both around them and under them that have good ideas that can help them succeed in the long term, and they can help them succeed in accomplishing their organizational goals. And there's just a huge sense of relief as humans when we know that we're not alone doing this. The instinct to take as much control as possible, the instinct to try to really micromanage isn't the right one. that by being more inclusive, by empowering those around us, we can actually be more successful.
Let me ask one more, just before we move on. Let me ask just one more follow-up question to Ori. So the way we've been talking about this so far, this has been about problem solving. My infection rate is too high. I want to bring my infection rate down. And one of the things we've heard from our clients as well is, as a new manager, your role can be as much about problem identification and prioritization, working to align the potential problems you could choose to tackle versus what's important for the organization, but also identifying where there is low-hanging fruit, where there are opportunities, where there are things you might want to amplify. One of the things I know we've been working on in the program is how to help new leaders develop the information networks that don't just reach vertically up and down in the organization, but spread sideways. To what extent do you find that these ideas apply both to identifying what's worth paying attention to, as much as sort of solving the problems, making the changes that we've decided to prioritize?
So a manager's role is really to be a sense maker within the organization and to translate organizational strategies to concrete actions that the team can make. At the same time, you have people who are at the edge of the network, who are able to see the problem from a different perspective. So this isn't just about generating ideas. This is about being very tactical and being very practical to solve actual ideas. So that when people are given the chance from all levels of the organization to make a difference, to actually see that their actions are contributing to the organizational success, that's when you have more inclusion, that's when you have more commitment and more belonging. And the job of a manager is to keep these processes of engagement.
Once again, Ori, let me step back. We're about to shift to the next step of the webinar today, but I just want to reiterate what really a pleasure it's been working with you, and what value we're really hoping to bring to the new managers in this program. Again, the notion of, boy, I need to learn how to solve problems that previously others have solved for me, and I need to do that over and over and over again, can be very intimidating. And just looking at this 4-step process of, that basically founded on a different idea, that the answer's out there, that it's about building the right network of people and bringing together in the right way. And there's some simple practical tools. I think we're really looking forward to being able to bring out to our participants in February as we roll with the program. So thanks again, Ori.
Thank you, and I really appreciate this approach of being very concrete and being very problem-solving oriented.
Right. And let's move forward now at this point to the next section of the webinar. Now, for those who are engaged today, we will have a Q&A section at the end. So you can begin to write your questions in the chat. That's how we'll be able to see them. So if you have questions for Ori, it doesn't need to be just me who's asking questions of Ori. You'll have a chance to, as well as questions about the program. And let me share with you a little bit about the program. We've said at this point that we'll be introducing the program, rolling the program out in February. Let me give you a little bit of background on it. So first, as we've been working with clients and charter group members for really months and months at this point on this program, one of the very early things we heard was becoming a new manager is a journey. And it's a journey that can have different emphasis depending on the organization. And so we've structured our new manager suite with that concept in mind. So the overall curriculum design of the new manager suite begins with launch into leadership. And that's a 3-month experience, a required experience. And we'll talk a little bit more about the components, the performance objectives we're driving with launch into leadership. But you can see some hints about that with Mindset Shift, the toolkit, and our topic for today, agility. And then that 3-month experience is followed by a series of optional programs, each of a shorter duration, focusing on some of the key skills that once a new manager is up on their feet to begin to drive impact, to be able to drive engagement, to begin to develop their team, how they can really broaden the organizational impact they achieve, through communication, through influence, through further change management, leading continual change. So that's an overview of the program structure. Required 3-month program, followed by a series of optional add-ons that you can choose between. I want to move ahead a little bit to dig into, okay, if you look into Launch into Leadership, that first program, what do we want to achieve with that first program? And working with our charter group members, talking about the challenges they see that they'd like their new managers to overcome, we really heard 3 clusters of program objectives. First one is about mindset, and that was really the topic of our first webinar that we did a few weeks ago. Mindset, we asked, what's the most common cause of 60% of new managers fail or underperform? What's behind that? What's the most common cause? And the first one was, the simple statement, what got you here will not take you forward. You may have been promoted because you were the best individual contributor, but it's a whole different way of creating value. It's a whole different mindset. So we've organized the program to very quickly begin to dig into having new leaders act actually as leaders. So move away from, what I create value through my work to I create value through enabling my team to be able to accomplish important, worthy tasks. Things like leaning into the role, managing the emotional journey, stepping into the identity, some planful tasks about making sure that you manage your time effectively. And quite significantly too, you even heard that in the agility conversation today. It's not just tackling what I think is important, it's tackling what's really going to drive organizational objectives and having some concrete ways to be clear about what those are and how I align my team's work against them. So, first big chunk, adopting a leader's mindset. Second big chunk is where many new manager programs focus, and sometimes almost exclusively. It's on a toolkit of important skills. As an individual contributor, you had technical skills. You may have had some other skills too. Now the level of importance of those, really jumps to the top. And you can see we have a series of, we call it a toolkit of skills we're developing, things from, getting organized, both for yourself and your team, prioritization and focus, clearly critical in, the worlds in which new managers live today, managing, not just for today, but managing multiple time horizons, along with skills about working with others, setting expectations, driving feedback, developing your people. So a set of toolkit skills that will accomplish and launch into leadership. And then finally, you won't be surprised, executing with agility. And, that's all of the conversation we've had for the, earlier part of the session today. How do I align to my context? You heard a lot about inclusively seeking input, amplifying what's wrong. Also down at the bottom here, as we worked with our charter group members, we heard quite a bit about the balance between me doing and me leading. And in fact, many of our charter group members say that they have quite a number of player coaches. And so there's, the objective in the program to tackle how do I think about that if I am a player coach? And when do I take on and when do I give to others? When do I do? When do I lead? And finally, it's not just my own emotional journey, but managing my team's emotional journey. So, if you step back, that set of objectives, a pretty robust set of objectives for the program, you can ask, how are we going to try to tackle those? So if we move ahead, in working again, bringing the ideas that we've used across our prior programs, but also adding some special sauce given the new nature of this audience, we're really looking to provide a different in kind learning journey, a transformational learning journey. And for those who are familiar with our academic partner programs, you'll be familiar with the notion that we drive learning by doing with impact. So we end up creating impact, and we have that by having you take program ideas and apply them in the world. We'll do the same thing here, The program is organized, you'll see the phrase bi-weekly modules, 6 bi-weekly modules, and in each of those modules we'll give an assignment. And that assignment will help me put myself in the role of a leader, adopt another element of a leader's mindset, practice some of those skills, the toolkit skills we'll weave throughout the program. And while I'm doing that, I'll be putting in place a leadership plan. I'll partially implement that plan during the program. It'll also be something I'll be able to speak to at the end of the program. And that leadership plan really focuses on what is the value that my team can add to the organization? What have we achieved on that since I've become a leader? And what are we thinking about doing next? So it's really about making sure that I can give an elevator pitch for how am I working with my team to create ever more value for the organization. We've also, working, just one final comment I'll make is, several times in today's conversation, we've talked about the emotional journey of a new manager. And, it can be quite lonely. So one of the requests that we've had that we built into the design of the program is a series of collaboration activities. And so those are woven throughout the program at a really pretty consistent pace. There's group meetings, peer live forums. There's learning partners who I work with, so I meet with my learning partners 6 times during the program. And we're introducing a new feature that we don't have in our prior programs called Momentum Coaching Sessions, which are really once-a-week sessions led by an ExecOnline facilitator that are about what are the challenges you're likely to face this week, give you a chance to expose challenges you may be running into, but also hear from others about their challenges and a little bit extra momentum to help you carry through those challenges. So, we're really looking forward to bringing the program out in February. Hard at work on it now with Ori, with Dory, for those of you who joined us in our first webinar. And, we really just appreciated the collaboration we've had, both with the insightful thought leaders that, are at the table with us, but also on the other side of that, the charter group members who have been just really clear and articulate about what the needs they face in their organization and the kind of journey that will work for them. So let me turn it back over to you, Adam, to talk about some of our timing as we go forward. But again, thanks to Ori and thanks to our charter group members who have helped us get here.
Yes, thanks, Chip and Ori, for a terrific overview of agility. I definitely learned a lot as Ori was moving through that information. And we'll, just so everyone knows, we have a Q&A in just a moment. So please continue to enter questions into the chat box. And we've gotten a couple of very good questions that we will discuss in a moment. Feel free to ask them about the program or ask them about Ori, or any of the content that he presented today. But before we get into the Q&A, wanted to share a little bit about the key dates for the launch of the program. So registration is open for the new manager program for our February session. The final program participation commitment date is December 21st for the February launch. And just so you know, we are launching this program in February for a good reason. We know that many of our employees are making the exciting transition to people managers in that time frame, and we really want to be able to set them up for success early in the year. On January 24th, the roster is due and the welcome module then will open. And then on February 25th, we launch the new manager program. So we start with launch into leadership. So how do you contact us to participate? Well, following the webinar today, you're going to receive a message with more information on next steps. And our advisory team at ExecOnline would love to have a conversation and partner with you on selecting the right population, deploying and integrating the program with your other initiatives, and collaborating with you on program evaluation. So more to come in the follow-up message that you will be receiving after the webinar today. So with the remaining time left, let's have some questions and answers. So please, again, type your questions into the chat box, and I will direct it to the right person. So we've gotten a couple of questions already that I think actually Ori would be a good person to take on. Maybe Chip could jump in as well. The first question, Ori, it's really about influence. How do you influence people, especially at the top, who are more control managers than innovation connect managers. What can we do to nudge leaders, to think, in this way, given the fact that we've got, a lot of control managers still at the organization. So any thoughts about that, Ori?
Right. What happens when you're operating under a command and control person? And I think that we can sing about the praises of agility all day long, but really the proof is in the pudding. And that if we can provide actual solutions, and ideally solutions that drive the profit and loss statement, then we can actually show the power of these networks. So the idea here is we have to be as pragmatic as possible. And we need to realize that if we can help people do their job better, they're going to be able to value this approach. We tend to have, I live in Silicon Valley, and we tend to have this false vision of the lone genius. But in reality, the way that innovation actually happens is in very small incremental steps throughout the organization, and it's by taking one. It's small steps like the gloves in the hospital, and by taking one idea and recontextualizing into another idea. So really, it's about helping the people above us solve their problems and being able to listen to those problems and solve them effectively with this process.
Great, thank you, Ori. That's a great answer, and I think a lot of our clients are struggling with this as sort of they're moving their organization away from that command and control structure over time to a world in which we're going to manage differently, as we've been talking about. So another question that came in around the agility loop. So to understand step one, listen. What are some pointers on how to be how managers can be more of an active listener? So any pointers that you have on that, Ori?
Sure. The biggest one that I have is that you need to view listening as something that isn't that it's not something that you have to check the box on, but rather you actually, as the listener, are benefiting more because you're hearing about something that you don't know yet. And it's about creating a system where everyone has a voice. So one of the exercises that we're looking in this program is how do you effectively give everyone an ability to speak up at least once? And there's this interesting study that the amount of effort it takes to speak up the first time in a group is a lot bigger, is a lot higher than the amount of effort to speak up for the second time or for the third time. So the most effective way of listening to people, surprisingly, is by getting everyone in the room an ability to talk at least once and to talk in small groups. And in so doing, we create a more diverse set of voices. And once we do that and we're able to empower them, that's when the real magic starts happening.
Great, thank you very much for that, Ori. And for others, if you have a question, please enter it into the chat box, and again, I will direct it to the right person. I have a question coming in that I'll actually direct over to Chip. So hi, I'm interested to know if you have any programs for manager of managers.
Great question, and I think for us an easy answer, which is yes, we have a whole series of them. So really, new manager is as we move into the new manager suite. That's based on our history, where we've developed 13 programs, I think, at this point, for ranging across topics that serve managers of managers and director level as well as VP level up the chain of command. So I think just quick browse on our website. We have a series of programs covering agility, strategy, finance, operations, marketing, and so on.
Great, thank you, Chip. And so we've got a couple of more questions, sort of thinking about the broader structure of the program and how we support. So one question is, how do you support international participants? Maybe Chip as well, if you could kind of discuss our support for international participants a little bit.
Yeah, great. So, as we've been working with multinational organizations, we've faced quite a percentage of international participants, ranging between 30 and 40% of our participants for each of our program runs. So it's something that we've developed some experience with. And, just some simple tools. First, we have a 24/7 help desk. We weave collaboration into all of our programs, not just the new manager program we discussed today. And that's often structured around event times. So simple tactic of we offer multiple event times so people can pick the times that are going to be practical for them. And we have a communication strategy which does reach out to participants to make sure that they're comfortable as they go along and know that they are not just that we have a support desk behind, but we're ready to help and we make them aware of that throughout. So we've seen over time that we've been able to achieve really high success rates, over 90% completion, over 40% net promoter scores, over 40 net promoter score values. For both people who are across the world.
Terrific. Thank you, Chip. And so another question that we have coming in is around enrollment. So, the question around, do you have anything to help with enrollment? And we absolutely do. And so for those who are our clients, we have a client success manager, associated with each of the accounts. And so one of the things that we can do is actually, get on the phone, take a call, kind of help you with the selection of the different, people to participate in the program, and then also to get, help you sort of think about how to get those different names that you need for the different programs. So we will definitely be helpful in that way. If you are not currently a client, we will also help as well. So if we're in terms of the follow-up as you get on with our advisory team, we can also speak about the enrollment part of that as well to make sure that we're able to provide any kind of support that you need in terms of identifying the right people to participate. And I think that's actually another question that came through just around who is sort of right for this program, and really thinking about new to role people managers, or those who are aspiring to be new to role people managers. And so as Chip was talking about a minute ago, we do have several different options for manager of managers, but then we also have this for our new to role people managers as well. So with the remaining time, any other questions? I'll wait a new moment. Okay, I think I've got another question as well. Let me read this for a moment. So another question for Ori. So new managers can get overwhelmed by the expectation of creating a splash and drive change from the get-go. This might be an implicit expectation from the larger organization. What thoughts do you have on that?
So I think that sense of being overwhelmed is really comes from thinking that we have to do it all ourselves, and that a way of being more effective is by enabling those around us to figure out how to effectively execute the organizational priorities. And that to remind ourselves, again, the more controlled that we cede, the more powerful that we get, that we're in this together. I think that such a big part of feeling overwhelmed is this feeling of being alone. And to remind ourselves that we're not alone, that there's others around us, both laterally and those that report to us, that want us to succeed. And that if we're able to do that, we're going to be more effective.
And let me, this is Chip, let me add a little bit to that. I mean, this issue is actually one we've spent a fair amount of time on in thinking about the structure of the program. You know, because on the one hand, it is the case in some organizations that there is an expectation of quote unquote making a splash. And as I thought the question was really aptly phrased, often that is implicit. I mean, nobody's really telling you that. You know, and you know, this is an area where we really have been working to break it down in a pragmatic way. You know, as you talk about quote unquote making a splash, what counts? And so we're integrating content into the program of, you know, what really counts, you know, and how quickly should you move? So for example, in the first few weeks of the program, should you take some small action that really is more of a credibility booster than perhaps something that will drive a material impact? And, you know, we're structuring, we mentioned having activities, you know, a set of the activities in the program are around being able to identify and prioritize, create focus around a quick win, and then be able to mobilize the team and other stakeholders on executing that quick win, while also having some sense that, by the way, this is the kind of thing you'll be doing ongoing, and you shouldn't necessarily expect that you'll hit the ball out of the park with the quick win either. It's really find the way to create some material value and get your team used to being able to drive that, and then with agility, move forward to identify the next one. So it's a great question, and it's one that we are taking some pains to try to break down into something mere humans can do, you know, in a time-constrained way as they move through the program.
Thank you, Chip and Ori. That's you know, terrific. You know, question that we definitely have been, you know, to Chip's point, wrestling with quite a bit is that the, you know, need for the quick win and how to structure that. The so want to, you know, just to wrap up, you know, I'd like to you know, first off, you know, thank everyone for joining the call. Again, you'll receive an email from us following the call. And would love to, you know, get on the line, you know, me, myself, you know, the members of our advisory team, you know, to help you think through, you know, how to implement this at your organization. I want to conclude with, you know, a final thought from Ori. So Ori, any final thoughts to conclude on?
Yes, a couple. One is to remind ourselves that the answer is going to be in the room, and it's our jobs as managers to amplify the good ideas that already exist. And the second is that we can break this down in 2 steps, and that's where the agility loop comes in. And to remind ourselves that this isn't just a one-time thing. Okay, let me listen, amplify, include, and adapt. No, this is a continual process that we need to instill in every part of the organization. And then people feel that their voices matter. And remind ourselves that really our jobs as managers of all levels and as leaders is to create memories for people and to remind them that they're a part of something larger, and that by working together, by being able to adapt in a more complex environment, is no longer just a aspiration, but it's something that all of us need to do, and that the way we can accomplish it, the best way, is by doing it together and by remembering that really there's value hidden in our organizations, and it's up to us to uncover that value.
Great. Thank you for that concluding comment, Ori. So we are now at time. You know, thank you very much for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you as part of the February launch group of our new manager suite. Thank you very much.